Alright, so today we're going to go over biodiversity, the first section of chapter 10, and just kind of figure out what biodiversity is and why should we care about it. So just to keep moving forward here, if you go on, what do you think biodiversity means? And you can figure it out just by looking at the word. Does bio mean, and what does diversity mean? So basically, bio means life, diversity means variety. Okay. So biodiversity is really the variety of life on Earth. And living things depend on each other, this idea of interdependence. So one of the issues is if you decrease biodiversity, in other words, if some species go extinct or die out, one of the problems you have is the other species that were depending on them for population control or as a food source, now they suffer too. And if you look at the first page of your book, of the chapter, it hits you right away. It says scientists have identified more than 2 million species. Tens of millions remain unknown. And if you look on the graph in your book, you can go over that. So it's amazing the interactions, and many of them we still don't quite understand. So if a species goes extinct before we can figure out how other species rely on them, we could really look at food chains and food webs getting into a lot of trouble. So biodiversity is important. Now, there are basically three types or three components or levels of biodiversity. The first one is the diversity of genes, and environmental, you don't talk about that too much because environmental deals more with the bigger picture. But if you look at these different species of dogs, here we have the tiny little Chihuahua and the Beagles, Rottweilers. They're all dogs, but they're not the same because their genes are different. Okay, and if we looked at, even in humans, there's variety, diversity in our genes, so on and so forth. So that's the first one. Now, the second one is there's diversity in species. Okay, monkeys, dragonflies, this flower here called a meadow beauty, so on and so forth. They're all different species. I think that's kind of obvious. The one you usually deal with in environmental science is the variety of ecosystems. So you have prairies and ponds, tropical rainforests. Each one's different. Different species are living in them. There are different food chains and food webs in them. So here we have a prairie, and here's a rainforest, and over here is just a pond in Florida. And these are all different ecosystems, and there's species in here that are relying on each other for a variety of different reasons, whether they're food sources or population control. Sometimes even a predator, sounds horrible, but by preying on certain animals will actually weed out the weak, the older, and the sick. And will actually keep the prey population stronger and healthier because of it. So biodiversity has a lot of benefits. It also has this idea, utilitarian value, which means it has a means, whether we can make money from it or learn from it. And those things are things such as goods, services, and information. Now, leading to that, what do we get out of biodiversity? Well, the oxygen supply, the algae and plankton, especially algae, can't talk today, in the oceans, supplies a lot of our oxygen, puts a lot of oxygen into the oceans for a lot of the other organisms there. Food, I think, is pretty obvious. Food source for our animals, our grazing animals, as well as for ourselves. Clean water. It's amazing how some organisms actually help to clean water systems out, stop water from going foul. Medicines, if you look in your book, there's a whole list of medicines just come from plants. Incredible. And some of them are what we call nature's kitchen. They're very, very hard to copy these formulas, these chemical formulas for these medicines. It's a lot better off if we could just either grow the plant and extract the medicine that way than to make it in a factory. The other reason is just for aesthetic reasons. Okay, it's nice to get outside into the woods. It's nice to go to the beach. It's nice to go hiking in the mountains. It's nice to go to a lake. It relaxes us. They've actually done tests on this, and blood pressure and stress levels lower when people are in a more natural environment. Also, there is money to be had, this idea of ecotourism. People giving tours through the rainforests and desert hikes and all kinds of things. A really, really important issues as human beings that we kind of need, especially now we're getting overpopulated, cities are getting larger, and it's nice to get out there sometimes and just be in, you know, a natural environment where we can relax and sort of be ourselves. So why should we be concerned about it? The reason is we seem to be losing species at a very, very fast rate. And you can read all the little details in here. But one of the problems is this is a key point. When species of plants and animals go extinct, a lot of other species get affected. And some ecosystems, we're not quite sure who the keystone species is. Now, the keystone species are really the species that are really, really critical in the functioning of an ecosystem. They're really, if you take them out, the entire food chain or food web there could pretty much just bottom out on itself. And you don't know, you know, not that you necessarily take out the keystone species, but what if you go after its food source? You know, if it's eating some type of plant and the plant goes away, then the keystone goes, and then basically after that the entire food chain or food web goes. And you can read through your book, and they talk about one particular issue with the sea otters in North America. They are a keystone species, and back in the 1800s they were basically overhunted. They eat sea urchins. Well, when the just to make it short and sweet, when the otters were gone, the sea urchin population rose really, really high. Sea urchins eat kelp. They basically ate most of the kelp. Finally, in the early 1900s, a group of surviving sea otters were discovered. They were protected, and today the kelp forests, the kelp beds are back. And the kelp beds support a huge, important ecosystem off the coast of California, and very, very important. And one of the issues, too, is when a species begins to go extinct, a lot of its genes are lost, and you get what's called this bottleneck effect. Okay, as populations decline, only certain genes are then available, and that's fine. But if some of those genes are bad, then what ends up happening is the newer generations now have a lot of these bad genes, I guess, that sort of hinder their survival. And they think that's one of the things that's happening with the cheetah right now, that they are bottlenecked. There's not much genetic variety between one cheetah and the next, and they're really, really fearful that it could actually eventually lead to their extinction at this point. So some threats to biodiversity, as is usual: habitat destruction, pollution, introducing a new species into, sometimes called an alien species, into an ecosystem. It gets in there, it has no natural predators, you know, and sometimes they just take off and they sort of run amok in these ecosystems. And it could be a plant. In the south there's a vine called kudzu. Kudzu came from, now I'm going to forget myself, I believe South America. They brought it up into the south in areas like Georgia, and the stuff has really just overtaken. Sometimes it's called the vine that ate the south. It literally grows, it can grow up to a foot, I believe, a day. It can bring down telephone wires, and they actually, certain communities actually have kudzu, basically kudzu killers. They go out and try to kill the vine off. Global climate change, global warming, and of course exploitation, overhunting, you know, people not listening to proper times to hunt animals, going into areas where they're not really supposed to go, and really ruining the ecosystem that way. So that's it for your first section, and you should probably go back over the review questions you were supposed to do yesterday. And again, we'll be kind of walking through this chapter before the holiday, and probably be ending right before the holiday with a short quiz. So you can discuss this now maybe come up with some different examples of some keystone species. It would probably help you to remember it. I would read the story about the sea otter in your book. It's pretty good. Okay, so talk to you soon. Bye-bye.